The second Ranger Battalion, we have our own MC called Killerman Sons, right? And those guys all went to combat with them. So I called them and I'm like, let's talk.
Welcome to Patch, where we look at the personal impact of life in outlaw motorcycle clubs. This episode, my co-host Justin Mooch Delaretto and I sit down with Vincent Rocco Vargas, actor on the FX show Mayans.
And then this one line she says broke me to a point where we had to stop filming for about 30 minutes because I couldn't get a hold of my emotions. I was like, damn, I've never heard that from someone else's mouth told to me at that moment, and now the cameras are running and 40, 50 people are watching me as I react.
That's this episode of Patched.
Are you an active member? The kind that would be missed? Or are you just content that your name is on the list? Do you attend the meetings and mingle with the flock? Or do you just stay at home and criticize and knock? Do you take an active part to help the club along? Or are you satisfied to just belong? To push the cause along and make things really thick? Or leave the work to just a few and talk about the clique? Think this over, brother. You know right from wrong. Are you an active member? Or do you just belong?
Great to see you, Mooch. How you been?
Yeah, good to see you, man. We had a question that some viewers asked that, now that we're out of the club life, are we still riding motorcycles? If so, do we go to rallies? And when we're at these rallies, do we try and stay away from other clubs, or how does that work? So how's your experience been with that, Jason?
Yes, we do go on rides. So I got a group of guys. We go on a ride once a year. I look forward to it. It's a fantastic time, and the group's getting larger and larger every year as we get going. But as far as for being at a run with where there are top 1% motorcycle clubs at, we're not trying to create any issues with anybody. So I don't really make myself known or walk up to members and introduce myself just because we're there. It's like, of course, we want to be respectful of any club and any event that they have going on. So, if they wanted to invite myself or Mooch somewhere, then of course we're going to accept the invitation. But as far as, trying to just say, oh, we're here and what's going on, no, we don't want to bother anybody.
Yeah, one of the reasons I joined a motorcycle club, or the reason, is because I love motorcycles. So that never changed. I ride often and everywhere. I go to a lot of events and rallies. In fact, Jason, I met you at a pretty big rally earlier this year. And so I try and stay really active when it comes to riding and going out. One thing I would say is, if there's other clubs around, I'll give respect as long as there's respect back, but I don't go up and introduce myself, or I just kind of stick to my own. And then, see how it plays out. But I'm no longer, a member of that lifestyle or that world, really. And so I just kind of let them do their own thing.
Second question we received was, do most 1% club members now ride new bikes, or are they fixing up old bikes for a certain look? Now, that's a good question, right? Because depending on the county, the area, the state you're in, it depends on what types of guys are coming around that charter. Now, you don't know if these are all young guys. Primarily, they're probably going to be looking at financing a bike, or getting something that they're going to be able to ride in the pack, and it will be consistent, right, without any breakdowns, because you don't want to be that guy that's on the side of the road that holds the pack up. But there could be a couple of charters out there that have a lot of the older members that are still into working on projects and getting bikes going. So it's hard to say, is it like one or the other? I think it just depends on kind of the age group of the charter. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, I think every club's a little different. There are some specific chopper clubs out there and stuff like that. But if you're in a bigger national club and you're required to spend a lot of time on the road, most likely you have a newer bike due to reliability reasons. I think that's the most important. You don't want to be the guy breaking down while there's a big pack and you guys are heading cross country or across state lines. And so I think from what I've seen over the years, there's a big push to have newer, more reliable motorcycles than there are the guys that are fixing up the old panheads and shovelheads and just mobbing around town.
And a little piece of advice for guys that are coming around clubs or thinking about it, look into those AAA memberships, and also look into when you get that to the 100 mile or the 100 mile or more, because in case something does break down and there isn't a chase vehicle, you at least have an option there. You know what I mean? So just something to think about.
So we got a comment from a guy that was in a club for 10 years and ended up having a drinking problem. And it was actually his own brothers that suggested he take a step away from the club for a while and get sober. And he said he ended up getting a DUI, had to go to, was mandated to go to AA and do some counseling. And he ended up getting sober in 1983, a long time ago. And he said that he'd be dead today if it wasn't for these brothers that held him accountable. And I think this really speaks strongly to what the whole Brotherhood is really supposed to be about. We're supposed to be there to see our brothers doing well and help our brothers, and whatever it is, whether it's getting a job, whether it's to get clean and sober. If we can do something to motivate or help hold our brothers to these standards, these accountabilities, I think that's the whole point of club life.
And just to add to that, like Mooch has mentioned many times, right, that his club had a chapter designated to rehab, right? Think about how much more rewarding it would be to keep a brother on the straight and narrow, and if he fell off track, to bring him back to center so that he could continue riding with him in the future. Like, just think about like that reward of giving selflessly to keep a brother in the charter. Right. And I think that's something that what we're trying to talk about a lot in the episodes is that we think that people should take a little mental note to be accountable for the brothers that you see that are maybe slipping a little bit, or guys who are spending too much time at that party. Right. Like, we're here to be a brotherhood to look out for those guys. And it's some of our responsibilities to look back and say, how can I make things a little bit, better for you if you need it? So just remember that it's not always about the party and who can party the longest. It's about keeping the whole group together, from start to finish.
And keeping the group safe, I think, is a big piece. If we're on the road together or staying out or whatever, we want to make sure everyone makes it home safe. And so being your brother's keeper, so to speak, is really an important piece of club life. All right, on this episode, we had Vincent Rocco Vargas. He was an actor on the FX TV series The Mayans. He was an Army Ranger and a Border Patrol agent. Rocco's one of those guys that succeeds in all ways of life, and we're really happy to have him on this episode.
And isn't he also a social worker like you are, brother?
Yeah, he actually just got his master's degree in social work, and he's kind of getting into the field now. He offers a weekly men's group that he's doing, and he's really reaching out and giving back. So it's one of these things I'm really excited about. So hope you guys like this episode. Check it out.
Hey, Rocco, welcome to the Patch Podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Rocco, you grew up in Southern California, the San Fernando Valley,
Yeah.
which plays a big part in the motorcycle club culture. Can you shed light on your early family life and connections to motorcycles and motorcycle clubs?
Yeah, I think my father was a former gang member and then got in trouble with the law, and he was kind of pushed to join the military or go, serve time. But he was always kind of the gang life was what he was familiar with. And once he got out of the military, he went into, by chance, eventually became a firefighter. And he was, in the motorcycle, what do they call it there? It was just like a motorcycle group for Los Angeles City Fire Department.
Yeah, Fire Hogs.
The Fire Hogs, yeah. So he's always been tied into being a part of a group, being a part of some kind of gang, club, whatever it is, and it's just been in his own heart. That's just kind of the type of dude he is. And so I seen it my whole life. And as well as growing up in LA, you see the gang life, and then when the transition with several other MCs, I think my sister even dated a Hell's Angels son and had a couple Thanksgivings at their den and and at their spots. So like in the Valley, you kind of there's people that are connected to it so much that you just kind of see it. And that's just pretty much how I was raised, just in the Valley, was trying to avoid the gang life stuff and seeing everyone else kind of partake in it.
And so, talking about all that, did you have any bad riding experiences, first starting out riding motorcycles in the Valley or Los Angeles?
Yeah, I wasn't one that was excited to ride. I didn't really think about it much, and then my buddy had a Vespa. And so
that's how I started too, brother.
I got on a Vespa and, had some whiskey throttle, couldn't let it go, shaking and baking down the road, boom, hit the floor. And I ran in the house crying, didn't tell my dad what happened because I knew he wouldn't let me get on a bike ever again. And, that was the first experience ever on a bike. And, I tried to avoid them for a long time after that until, in the future, later on in my military career, I started messing with bikes a little bit for combat.
Tell us a little bit about that. When did you get onto a bike and kind of what got you back to riding?
The military, I was in the 2nd and 75th Ranger Regiment, which is like a special operations unit, and so we do a lot of different kind of skill sets to be really good at war, and one of those was recon, and some of the recon training that we did was learn how to ride dirt bikes, so we can kind of observe an objective and then boot scoot, get out of there as fast as possible. And so I did a training for that for about a week and a half, and I learned real fast that I've been missing out on that life a little bit. And then when you fast forward that, my bike riding consisted of landing Mayans, you know. As much as I thought about it in the back of my head, buying a bike, I never got around to it. My life was so busy with military, law enforcement, and everything else. And then when I was at my audition for Mayans, you know, they were like, have you ever ridden a bike? And I didn't want to lie to them and say, no. You know, I was like, how am I going to get this job? So I just kept thinking of my fall on a Vespa. And I said, yeah, I'm pretty good at it, you know. And so that was me convincing them I could ride so I can get the part. And eventually, you know, they ended up sending us to the Glendale Harley so we can just get certified. Me and Joe, actually, you know, the other actor who plays Creeper in Mayans, we went together. And then from there, every season of Mayans, it was kind of routine. What they did for us was they brought us in about a week to 2 weeks early, and we rode as a group, and we did our best to kind of, you know, ride as close to what we've seen from other MCs, riding close to each other and at a good rate of speed and trying to stay in a formation. And so that was like the depth of like my learning. After season 1, though, I definitely bought a bike, and I did my best to ride as much as possible.
Did it inspire you to, like, you know, do any road trips or like longer rides, like that type of stuff? So you bought a bike, so it inspired you to ride a little bit more, right?
Yeah, you know, there's something about, you know, being on a bike that feels good, right? There's something about it that psychologically I felt like it calmed down my brain. I'm one of those active brains that thinks too much and everything's going on. And being on a motorcycle, it forced me to focus on the task at hand, which actually felt good. You know, it actually quieted the noise, you know. And you know, I told my wife, like, you know, I'd love to take you to lunch on these things, you know. So we go on lunch trips, you know. It's nothing big. We'd maybe ride an hour and then to lunch and then an hour back, something like that. Mm-hmm. I rode to several places in LA when I brought it down to LA for Mayans, and just getting those long rides in. I actually, you know, I started finding friends that rode. So like, let's go to, you know, when I was living in Salt Lake City, we'd ride up to Park City, you know, and do that. It's a really nice ride over there, and so just find these groups of friends that did it and all kind of thought the same. We're like, well, you know, none of us were part of a club, but let's just go ride together for the safety of it. And, you know, it became a thing for a while, you know, and then, you know, my wife decided to get pregnant and she got scared that I was going to die. And
that happened.
Yeah, she convinced me to take a break for a while.
One of the things we talk about on the show, you know, is how motorcycles can bring people together. And you brought up that once you started riding, you started meeting other people and doing rides with other people. So what was that kind of like? Like, was it people you knew that had bikes, or did you meet people that rode and you guys just kind of decided to do stuff together?
I had one friend in Utah who, his name's Jesse, man, and he's like the motorcycle guru in our area, you know, and so I hit him up about teaching me how to ride a little bit better, so when I get back to the show, I feel more confident. And so we go to the parking lot, and he'd help me. Eventually, I got my motorcycle's license. But then from him, he had a couple of friends that rode with him, so we'd jump in, I'd ride with them. And then I'd post a picture, and someone would reach out like, hey, bro, I'm in Salt Lake. I'd love to ride. And that kind of just snowballed into about 6 or 7 of us, you know. One of them was a radio host from a morning show. He started riding with us, you know, and it just kind of became a thing. And, you know, in that same conversation, though, I had a barber we were going to set up a ride, and he ended up passing away before we could. And then I had a good friend that we were planning this long, like 4-hour ride, camping out for the night with our wives and coming back home. And he as well, you know, unfortunately, you know, someone turned in front of him and he passed away. And so, you know, I learned real fast that, you know, that lifestyle of riding a bike, and it's not always how good you can ride. You know, the safety of the roads is not always determined by how good you are. And so, you know, it's a consequence that sadly enough, it's part of the lifestyle. And so, you know, that's scared the heck out of me and scared the heck out of my wife. But I think we're both in the space now. We're like, you know, the kids are getting a little older. We'd love to do a nice little ride to like Vegas or something. So the conversation has been started to think about buying another one.
Well, and I think, you know, I've never been in the military, but, you know, from what I've had from other guests and stuff, you know, some of that shared experiences is doing dangerous things together, right? Like, obviously going out, having fun, but then the fact that bad things could happen, right? Like, this is life or death in a certain way. And I think motorcycles mimic that to an extent, right? Like you said, like we could be planning a great ride out here and go camping, but something can happen in an instant, and and it could get disastrous. So I think there's always that reminder that death's like lurking, right? Like when you're doing hobbies such as that.
Yeah, not even that. It also it builds that camaraderie a little bit closer. You know what I mean? I've gone through some crazy stuff with some of my friends in combat that I think has me emotionally connected to them almost deeper than some of my my blood relatives. And it's just something that if they call me, I always feel very torn to, like, I'm going to go out of my way to help them because that's a brother in arms. But it'd be no different than a brother in an MC or someone that you've gone to war with, in a sense. When I say war, like when you fought with, so you've broke bread and you've also bled with. That's something that I don't understand how that happens, but you emotionally we get really connected to another person that you experience things with.
Yeah, there's a sense of that, like trauma bonding, right? Essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a therapist, but lack of a better term, but you go through something traumatic with somebody, you're going to have a different level of connection with them than you're going to be with others. And in the biker world, it might not even be something super dangerous, but hey, man, we're broken down on the side of the road. It's 12 degrees out and we're getting snowed on. Like in the moment it's miserable, but those are the stories when you look back that you're laughing, they're hilarious, and the guy that was with you, like you guys have that extra connection moving forward. And it's cool to see that kind of play out in other lifestyles too, because I think the foundation is the same.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is some of the worst moments of my military career, are the most memorable ones. Those are the ones I look back and be like, man, I told myself I hated that day, but it's actually one of the funniest days of my life. And it's something I found on the Mayans set. Like everybody has a past, and it's this really cool situation where we all went our own paths during our younger years, and we all found our way together through acting. And no matter whether it was in prison and law enforcement, you know what I mean, we're at a same, we have a same connection through trying to be successful now in this world. And I connected really closely with Richard Cabral and Clayton Cardenas and JD Pardo, those three, which in the first pilot, we were hanging out just like homies. We connected. And the cool thing was that the writers, Elgin and the other gifted writers, saw the connection, the camaraderie, and the cohesiveness that we had within day 2 or day 3, that when they reshot the pilot, they had to reshoot the second pilot, they wrote us as a foursome of friends because it was such a natural blend of how we communicated. And the communication between us there's a parallel between Richard, who spent a lot of time, incarcerated, and me, who spent a lot of time in military fighting. Those are two very different worlds, but similar emotional reactions to the space, right?
And also very structured, and for sure.
So we connected right away, and it felt like he was just one of my homies from basic training, from the way we talked, the goofy jokes, this weird, these weird jokes that like borderline like that was kind of gay, bro. You know what I mean? Like right. This banter that is very common in dudes in this space like that, and it created a connection that I never expected, man. That I could find outside of the military, and which then me and him, we all talked about writing together. It never ended up happening. Life got busy, but we connected through the show in the same sense of we felt like an MC, bro. I know that's crazy as to sound, like it's crazy, but 5 years with the same dudes wearing the same cuts, living this false reality in our own heads, it felt like a brotherhood where I would fight for these mother. Even if there's someone I didn't like I don't like this that much, but I'll fight for him because he's part of the crew, and that's how it felt authentic.
And that parallels club life. I mean, and that's what I was going to say when you're kind of explaining that is, you get brought into this culture, and I'm sure it's the same with military and other things, but you click with people that have similar shared experiences, whether the backgrounds are a little different, but there's things we have in common or we can relate to, or we have, similar personalities or whatever. And there's always going to be that you know, for lack of a better term, kind of the clique within the crew, you know, and it's like, okay, it's the four of us, and that's what, you know, that's what really motivates people to keep going, or those, like you said, those rough times. Well, hey, I got this guy with me, you know, like, or like you said, hey, you know, I'm gonna back this guy up. Like, you build these bonds, and it's so natural because it's based off of who we are as people, our morals, our values, our personalities. But that's really the same with motorcycle clubs. So it's cool that you guys kind of got to experience that when you were playing that, because I think that's what makes it authentic as well.
So Rocco, so you get the call, you know you're getting a part on the show. What's going through your head, like thinking like, I'm going to play someone from a motorcycle club? You know, you grew up around it. You've seen guys wearing patches. You've seen the packs rolling down the highway. You know, what's going on in your head? You know, I know our listeners are thinking like, holy shit, this is one of the guys that was on the Mayans. And like, you know, like, how did he feel like he was going to play this like very important role portraying basically a club like the Mongols, you know? So how did that all transpire?
Yeah, you know, it was kind of two parts. You know, I was a little nervous, being that as former law enforcement, that I wouldn't be welcomed into the club, right, to the group, because most of these actors had a past in gangs or incarceration. And so, you know, some of the nerves were like, when they find out I'm a cop, you know what I mean? Is that gonna kill the mood of the whole thing? And maybe that'll be enough for them to kill me off the show. So that's a first thought. You know, I want to fit into this group of men. I want them to be confident and comfortable with me in the room. And, you know, second part is, as much as I've seen it and understand it and watched all the shows about MCs, I really had to do like a deeper dive in what that looked like. And so I started really researching MCs and the culture. You know, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, we have our own MC called Killerman Sons, right? And those guys all went to combat with them. So I called them and I'm like, let's talk, man. And I'm gonna be here. Let's meet up. And I'd ask questions. And, you know, some of those dudes were some of my closest friends in the military. And so I was able to kind of pick from everybody and see a few dudes that are in the MC life and connect with them online and say, hey, I'd love to have a conversation. And then I'd watch a lot of dudes. I'd follow a lot of social media, you know, and I watch these dudes and kind of think like, you know, how they portray themselves, how they carry themselves. And so, you know, when creating Gilly, the character Gilly that I play on Mayans, you know, it wasn't a far stretch from who I was, but it was also kind of if Vince Vargas knows the lifestyle of a good family, because I was very blessed to have that, well, I wanted to make sure Gilly didn't. And Gilly's family was the club, you know, and I didn't necessarily feel that in my life. Like, as much as my military men were my brothers, my wife and kids are my family. And so I didn't have that disconnect that most young military members do. Most military members are looking for family. Most gang members are looking for family. Most MCs are looking for family. And I necessarily didn't have that same want. I have other wants, but that's what Gilly's character wanted, a family. And so in the show, the MC was his family, you know, and also on the show later on, if you watch the whole show, was he had to make choices between his two families, his veteran brothers and his MC, and he was very conflicted. And it was really beautiful to try and portray that, because that is a very honest emotion for a lot of my buddies who got out of the military and went to the MC life.
So like when the military stuff came into the show, was it easier to portray that part of as a character? Because and that's all based on real life, what your brothers are dealing with, right? I mean, like the being back in the States and like trying to assimilate. I mean, like,
yes.
How hard is it for you guys to be going through every day of the week, you know, struggles, to have to listen to some bullshit from somebody, thinking like, do you know what I did for this country, or do you know what I did overseas, or, you know, like, do you know what I'm dealing with because of the stuff I went and did? Like, you know, how did that play out mentally, you know, for you to kind of almost relive that stuff by acting it? Was that also hard?
That's exactly it, is that I've never had to play myself where I had to live my emotions on screen that were honest. You know, I've been playing an actor. I've been kidding. I'm not really Gilly. All those things are fake, right? That's a character. But when you tell me to play a guy that's struggling with post-traumatic stress, struggling with assimilation, and then the story that they used on the show was a real scenario from my life. I've never heard anyone say it out loud until I was on that table during rehearsal, and it blew me away. It ended up putting me to a little bit of a depression, because I learned how as an actor to cultivate these emotions. I never learned how to shut them off. Right, I'm pretty new in the acting space, and so I allowed myself to get back into a dark place that I've been working very hard for many years to get the out of. And then this one line she says broke me. broke me to a point where we had to stop filming for about 30 minutes because I couldn't get a hold of my emotions. I was like, damn, I've never heard that from someone else's mouth told to me at that moment, and now the cameras are running and 40, 50 people are watching me as I react.
Yeah.
It was hard, man. And you know, I never told that story to the public, but like, yeah, it put me in a depression that I had to get some counseling myself just to find a way to shut that off.
And if you don't mind us asking, what was that line that triggered that?
So she talked about a woman. She said, and how about that woman? She's communicating about a woman who was killed in combat, the collateral damage that happens in war. And there was a scenario in Iraq where a woman and some kids were being used by the terrorist organization, essentially. These two individuals were using their vehicle to ram into one of our trucks and then shooting out the back window, and in the back seat was women and children. And a very common tactic that ISIS and you know, the Al-Qaeda would use to kind of psychologically destroy us. And you know, you don't see it often, but it happened in that day. And you know, I caught a glimpse of the whole scenario, and you know, for a long time I held that, not sure like how to handle that. And Mooch, you understand this, but it's you know, it's a moral injury, right? Like it's a conflict of my morals and values that I've ever expected to see in war. I signed the dotted line to fight the enemy, and then in this moment, I'm witnessing innocent people get killed, unfortunately, in the chaos of war. And you know, and for a long time, that I couldn't get that out of my head. So hearing her say that was like, damn, I've never heard anyone say it back to me, you know. And I've written it, right? I actually handed that to Elgin, so I was like, excuse me, cut, like, give me a second. And yeah, man, that one. And it ended up carrying on even longer because I had to kind of keep playing this hurt veteran that was struggling. And in real life, I fought so hard to get out of that mindset, and I was putting myself in it. And then I had to go home and see my kids. And the craziest part about it, man, is that, you know, I might be acting emotionally, but my body doesn't know what is right and wrong. My body is feeling it and going through it as an honest emotion. And so, boom. I'm in depression. I was in depression. And so me and my wife had to work real hard in getting me out of that, because then I'm coming home and that spills onto my family, right? I'm feeling unloved from everybody, and all the little counter reactions to that, trying to feel loved again, trying not to feel, and then being very hyper vigilant with things. And so, yeah, man, I didn't know what I was getting into. And, you know, I am honored to have played that character for the millions of veterans who watch the show and those who feel they don't have a voice. But I didn't know it would take the toll it did on me.
Those emotions, those feelings, they come up, you know, from veterans, they come up with the club guys. And I think something that's cool that it was shared on screen, and you're kind of sharing it too, is you're in this room full of alpha males, these tough guys, you know, there's bikers, but you have people you can talk to about these things. And I think that goes a long way. And that's one of the things our show talks about too, is, you know, these emotional effects of living those lifestyles, but how do we express them, or how does we get through them? And having, you know, like we were talking about, talking to those dudes that you have these shared experiences with, or these like tight connections with, being able to go to them and say, hey dude, you know, bringing this back up really put me in this headspace. Just having someone to talk to, I think, goes a really long way. And I think that's what some people miss when it comes to motorcycle clubs, is that they are grown men that can talk about feelings, man. And you do, I mean, the military's the same and stuff. You have someone there with you that can understand your shared experience. And I think that goes a really long way. And then I also think too, like you brought up a pretty valid point that people don't get, is we talked about this with all of our guests, but you know, most people nowadays that join motorcycle clubs do have families and careers. And, you know, this isn't the 60s and 70s where we're doing club life 24/7. And it's really, really hard to prioritize and balance. Like, does the club come first? Does my family come first? I've got this thing going on with my kids this weekend, but I'm being called to the clubhouse. And really trying to figure out that work-life family balance, I think, is a really big struggle for, you know, all members of motorcycle clubs. And you got to see it even from playing a role, you know. So I think that's something, you know, worth acknowledging as well.
As much as the MCs struggle with that, so do military, so do law enforcement, so do most businessmen.
Yeah,
you know,
it's life.
And we sometimes stay in our heads thinking it's only us and we're alone in that emotion. It's like, it's a human condition trying to have a family and hold it down on both sides. It's a tough thing.
Absolutely. And it's good to know that, because if I know, hey, the fireman's going through it, or so, then I have someone I can talk to too, or someone I at least know can understand the predicament I'm in, or the situation I'm in, you know, and holding those things in, thinking, oh, I'm the only one, or no one's going to understand. And, you know, I think we all know how those effects play out when we do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are all important. And we appreciate you sharing, Rocco. That's huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, because all of our listeners are home are, you know, they're going through all these mixed emotions and they're dealing with stuff just like we just talked about. And they need to hear people like Mooch and I and you and all of our guests talking about it's okay to talk to somebody.
Absolutely.
I mean, like, there's still so many men out there that don't know it's okay to talk to somebody. They don't know it's okay to bring this up. So they don't know it's okay to say, I need a minute, you know, like, all right, today's not a good day. And like, I need help to get back on track, you know? So like you said, the bank wants their money on Friday and we're doing everything we can to make sure we have those bills paid. And it's like, it's a constant that never stops. And so like, you need to take time for yourself to make sure you're okay, to be able to take care of all the things you need to take care of. That's important.
Absolutely.
Hey, what's up, guys? This is Mooch. A lot of you have been asking where to get an autographed copy of my book, and the only place you're going to be able to get it is here at the automotoentertainment.com website. The link's down below. We'll have paperback and hardback, so click the link, check it out, and get your signed copy today.
That's great, Mooch. A lot of people have been asking me about that. It's a great read, and you guys got to check it out. Patch merchandise is available at automotoentertainment.com.
We talked a little bit about, you know, you kind of growing up and being around club life and our gang life specifically, mainly from the neighborhood and the family. So how did you avoid getting involved in gangs? Like, what kept you away from that lifestyle?
Man, you know, the fear of my dad whooping my ass, man. My dad was a very stern, tough individual. You know, we knew his gang background, right? He kind of carried himself almost, you know, very swag, kind of like LA Cholo still kind of personality, you know, at the time when we were younger more so. My brother was involved in some gang life as well, and, you know, it was conveyed to me at a very young age that I was focused on sports and not get involved. And from 4 years old, I started playing t-ball. Year-round baseball when I was 7, played basketball and football, and you know it's funny about guilty by association. At times I have friends that are all in the gangs, I have friends that are in the streets, and in the San Fernando Valley, I mean, you live on one street, it's a gang, the next street's a gang, the next street's another gang, and so you can't avoid being around the gang life, but you know you start to gain a reputation of yourself, whether you're an actual gang member or a street kid, or you know you're trying to avoid it. You know, there's respect from some of my friends who were just like, man, stay out of it, do your own thing. And but you know, even in that sense, you find that you know some of your friends are not so fortunate and you get killed due to gang violence. And so I knew at a young age I wanted to be some kind of law enforcement, military, or professional baseball, and I knew that getting involved in any of those lifestyles was not going to be conducive to that. You know, there was times that you had a friend's house and dudes are getting jumped in, and you're like, well, why not?
Right.
But you know, I kept like, no, I'm good. You guys go do your thing. You know, there was one point I had an old timer, kind of an OG, told me, you know, they knew I was pretty good at baseball in my little neck of the woods, like my little friend group, and he told me, he's like, keep doing your thing, mijo, focus on that. And that was kind of a cool thing to hear from one of the more OG dudes in the area say that. It made me feel confident, like, all right, they see me, I'm gonna try and stay the path. And so fortunately enough, it worked, you know.
So you said you always were into thinking about military or law enforcement. Do you even remember, like, what was that? Where'd that drive come from? Like, what sparked your initial interest?
You know, the military thing wasn't interesting until, like, there was war. Then I'm like, man, I kind of want to see it, you know? The law enforcement thing was interesting. I mean, I was young, bro, but the first movie I watched that was, like, law enforcement heavy was Colors. You know,
I was gonna guess that, bro.
You know, it's kind of like the fight against good and evil, man. And my heart was always like, man, I'd love to be the good guy, you know, cops and robbers or whatever it was. It was always, for some reason, I really enjoyed the idea of being a cop, you know. A lot of people in my high school were smoking weed and stuff, and I stayed away from it for the fact that I knew I wanted to pass a drug test for the LAPD. And that kind of snowballed into, like, I'm going to go that direction somehow, some way. But, you know, baseball carried me into college. And then I lost a full ride, and I was working at a Texas Roadhouse in Kentucky, watching the war on TV, and then I was like, you know what? I want to see that firsthand, so let me do that.
Did you finish college before you went into the military, or did you sign up and jump in?
No, I finished college in the last couple of years. I've been doing a lot of college, man, but I was only in college to play baseball. I didn't give a about nothing. It's just later down the road, I got my bachelor's in social and criminal justice, and then I have a couple master's degrees now as well.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it off air, but you have a master's degree in some similar stuff as me as well. Like, you're doing some social work and some other stuff like that, right?
Well, I have a master's in journalism and a master's in psychology, and then I'm doing the master's in social work now. Awesome. I did the whole substance abuse counseling certificate, and so I'm on the path, man. You know, I've evolved from the veteran side of my world to now I'm in this position mentally where I'm trying to just how do I serve my brothers and sisters who need it, you know. What's cool is we were talking about people who share, you know, all these shared experiences, whether you're totally alike or totally different, you know. And I would say you and I have a lot of things that are pretty different about ourselves, right? But my first experience was riding a Vespa. I crashed into a parked car because I grabbed too much throttle. You know, I played every sport growing up. Came from a great family and played Little League and all that. I was more into wrestling and other stuff, but same thing. Consider going in the military. The difference was I got a felony, so I couldn't. But then we both ended up doing social work, you know, and being around this motorcycle club lifestyle. So it's so cool. I guess my point is it's so cool. You kind of pick people from different groups and then still find these common bonds or these common threads, regardless of, you know, what they're doing or where they came from. So I think that's really cool. Absolutely.
So previous guests have talked about like Sons of Anarchy and the Mayans' influence, you know, when the shows were out. The influence that it had on the culture, like how the clubs kind of grew because like a new group of kids or young men were watching the shows and how they fantasized, you know, like the lifestyle, and some guys said, I'm going to make the move and I'm going to try to get there, right? So did you notice that when you were in the show? Did you guys like feel like the presence of like people saying like, man, I want to join a motorcycle club, like you see them on the street when you guys were done with the scene? Or did you feel like you could feel like a presence or that there was almost like a movement around that show, you know, over the years it was on, that young guys were thinking about joining?
Yeah, man. You know, I saw it first with Sons. You know, I saw the certain bikes that were getting purchased and you know, the type of look that people were rolling with. You saw more people
the
wearing,
white tennis shoes.
You know, the white, right? You know, you saw it, and then, you know, the motorcycle that they rode, forget the Dynas, right? Those became really popular. Common, right? Film and television is the biggest influences of our culture, right? And so we started to see people on motorcycles, the ape hangers and the bedrolls, you know, on the front of it. You started to see more Chicano style and a lot more people looking for that kind of thing. And I've heard, you know, I have friends that hit me up and you know, now they ride a lot more and stuff like that because of the show. And you know, it's what film and television does. You know, it's the same as, you know, Navy SEALs have a ton of recruits because of the books and the movies they make. It's just what happens, you know. And I don't necessarily think it was a bad thing. I just think sometimes we had to, you know, I had to tell people like, look, bro, I'm just an actor. You know, I respect the culture, but I'm an actor. I don't know it as well as others, but we just portray the best version of what we can on film and television. But yeah, we had a lot of people hitting us up, man. We had a lot of people hitting us up for what shoes we wore on the show, what gloves did we have, and everything. And we don't pick that, right? It's the people that do the wardrobe. I just asked for my Nike Cortezes. That's what I asked for, and that's the only thing I got to pick.
So, Rocco, did you experience that bond that was missing from your life after leaving the military? What path did you embark on after leaving?
Yeah, man. You know, the only thing I knew what to do was how to shoot a gun. And so I right away was looking for law enforcement jobs. The first job I ever had was a corrections officer right out of the military. And that was a wake-up call for me because it was something I never wanted to do. But it's like you're serving time in there without serving time just on the other side. And then I applied for the Border Patrol, and I was able to get into the Border Patrol. That was me going back to like a familiar lifestyle with Brotherhood and Camaraderie and kind of the life and death chase, you know, the possibility that something might, you know, you might be involved in a serious matter. And I missed it, and I wanted to be a part of it again.
Did getting into Border Patrol, did that kind of fill that void?
Not at first. When I got into the Border Patrol Special Operations units, that's when it felt just like Special Operations in the military, like that higher risk kind of job, the more dangerous missions. That's just kind of where my heart's at and is what I wanted to do. And, you know, I always had the imagination that I was going to be involved in some crazy thing and, you know, die on my sword, right? You know what I mean? And so, like, I was willing to sacrifice my life for the greater good in my head. And so, you know, I was always looking for the scariest, most hardest challenges.
And so when you got into that special forces group, you found more like-minded people that you could assimilate with, right?
Yeah.
What was it like, like socializing with these guys afterwards? Were you guys able to unwind and share stories? And I'm sure everyone was military background, so you felt pretty close pretty quick, or?
Yeah, it's, not everyone was military, It's just the commonality of willing to risk your life for something greater. That's it. That little thing right there is same as an MC, same as a gang, we were our own little gang, if you will. And if you're willing to do that and you're willing to die for me, I'm willing to die for you, well, then we're good. We drink some beers, we talk to each other. It's the same thing as like this weird banter that goes back and forth between men. And once you kind of get into that zone of things, it's like, man, that feels like home. And I felt like home again doing that.
And did your unit have a special tattoo?
Yeah, man, that's funny. Yeah, I haven't got it yet. I've been trying to find the right spot, but I've been telling myself I'm gonna. My unit in the military, we had one. I have it in the back of my arm here. I was part of, like I said, 2nd Ranger Battalion, but we had a 1st Platoon tattoo. I do have that. And then with our special unit, it's essentially the wings with medical.
Oh, cool.
And that's one. And I have another thing. So yeah, those are logos and symbols that mean a lot to me. For a long time, I kept those off of me for whatever reasons. My idea of getting prisoner of war, and but whatever. Now I don't care.
You always have that in common with those guys, and it's something that you every time you look at it, there's a respect.
Absolutely.
That goes with that.
When a youngster joins a motorcycle club, or the freshly out of high school or college guy joins the Army or the military, you have this perceived notion, right? And like you said, you have these visions of dying in war and all the dangers that come with it. How has that changed, like, as you've gotten older and have a family and a Hollywood career and all that? Like, how has that changed kind of your outlook on the dangers that come with the lifestyle that you've chose?
I still think about it, and I think there's always something that's worth dying for. That I would justify even unfortunately leaving my family behind for. And there's certain things that I'll always feel that way about. And if say if we get attacked on our own soil, I'm going to suit up and fight because I feel like I'm trained enough and capable enough to do that and do it well. It's just the way my heart is. My wife knows that. I'm always looking to either step into something if I'm out in public, but I try and make better choices nowadays that I'm older. I'm not as fast. I'm not in the best shape of my life, but I carry a gun almost everywhere I go in the event that I have to step up and protect. And so that's just it's in my heart, and my wife knows that. But I think I'm more calculated with it. I know that if I can get my family out of there safe, I'd do that first and get away. But the older me would be like, jump into it and get into it.
For sure.
That comes with as we get older.
Yeah.
What do you do now to stay in shape, plus also to help your mental health? Like, what kind of hobbies or stuff do you do to kind of keep you grounded and also keep you staying in shape for what you do for a living?
Yeah, so I started running again. I've lost a lot of weight recently because I'm back in the fight. what I do right now for the Border Patrol, I'm embedded with Border Patrol agents and I document them, but that doesn't mean I'm the danger avoids me. I'm still right there with them as we're chasing dudes or people, whatever that looks like. So, there was just recently a memo that, the cartels greenlit Border Patrol agents and I embed with Border Patrol agents. So my idea is just be ready for a fight if it's coming. Besides that, I do a lot of breath work, and I do a lot of reading, and I'm just all about just trying to keep a more grounded self by those different modalities that are just non-psychedelic and stuff. Like, I try and stay just breathing, meditation, music, reading,
Awesome.
Are you involved with any military groups that are, that meet to talk about their everyday struggles, or do you do that on a weekly basis or on a monthly basis, or?
Yeah, I have my own group actually I started called Light the Fuse, and we meet every Tuesday night. And in that group, it's men. It's just men in general. Just the path that I'm taking with mental health and wellness. I decided to kind of create this group that's just an open dialogue and discussion of focusing on these guys' traumas and how to heal them. Some people are in a really good state of where they're at right now, and they just want to support others. Some are just in the beginning of it, right? They're right in the middle and the thick of it. And so we're just a community of men who are just trying to find answers for each other, very motivated in the positive promotion of actions. A lot of guys like to wallow in their victimhood, and we don't allow them to sit there too long, and we get them just to get some actions in their life it's been very successful for me. I mean, as much as I created it, it's just been just as therapeutic for me to hear other men and being able to kind of guide them. And some of those answers are guiding myself as well.
That's really cool.
No, that's awesome. That's huge.
So you seeking out the Border Patrol, kind of getting into Border Patrol, you've been serving in that capacity for many years now, it sounds like. What's your kind of daily life with that agency or professional duties? What do they consist of, or what does that look like?
You know, when I joined the Border Patrol, my goal was to get into special operations. The special operations that I made it on is called BORSTAR, which is Border Patrol Search, Trauma, and Rescue. I told you the story about Iraq and Afghanistan, and for a long time I questioned whether, you know, and I see faith very different now, definitely more mature in how my relationship with God is. But back then I thought, you know, I needed to earn good points over the bad, you know, and so everything you see in combat you're involved in, and just everything, I started questioning whether God would even let me in, you know, and that weighed heavy on me as someone who was a Christian at the time. I'm still a Christian, but someone who was like really struggling with his faith. I was like, I might have just ruined everything now, you know. And so my counter to that was become a medic, you know, and so I became a medic and did my best to try and save as many lives as possible. And I thought that I was gaining, you know, these good points, you know, like good karma points. And I was very honored to be in that position, very honored to attempt to save as many lives as possible in that space, you know. And we saved hundreds of lives in my time, and it felt good. But, you know, that was the goal of becoming a medic was, you know, I was trained to take lives. I was trained to fight wars, and now I'm trained to save lives. I'm trained to come keep people, you know, to risk my life for those who are in the worst time of their life. And so I really pivoted the way I saw the world, and really pivoted the way I saw God. And you know, I don't see it the same anymore. I think I've been very active in maturing how I see God. But that was my motivation at that time, and what I thought, you know, and how I saw it. And so that's what I did daily, was be in a position to try and save people who are lost or drowning or needed saving, needed rescuing. Now my job for the Border Patrol is kind of in a journalism space. I am fully embedded with them. I'm still a medic, right? So in the event that someone does need me, I can still act. But my goal is to try and really educate the people on what the career field is and why it's so valuable. You know, most people don't know the Border Patrol, and they say I'm Hispanic, and they have all these stories about it, whatever the case. But if they read the book that I wrote about it, it's really about, it's the one agency that stops more drugs and saves more lives than any agency in the United States. And if that statistic is not enough for you, I don't know what is. It's the most active organization on our borders that are saving lives and stopping drugs. That's all I need to say for me to be like, yeah, I like that. I support that. And so, you know, I'll continue to try and help them in their messaging until something else pops up that pulls my heart. And that's just the way it is. That's the way I see the world.
Do you see staying in that, like I guess you just said that, until something else comes up, but what do you see the like your future with, like, you know, that type of career, or what's your kind of future look like with that?
You know, I would love to get to a point where I can just be a clinician in mental health and, you know, and addiction, and help people in that space. I'd love to see that be the financial, you know, the financial space where I don't have to worry about anything else to left or right, and just do that, because that fills my cup. You know, that fills my cup. That makes me feel good to serve others. But, you know, I'm never going to turn my back on Hollywood and the creative side. There's something about being a creative that I thrive on, and as well as to know that, you know, the same way that people are influenced by Mayans MC and buying motorcycles, that maybe I can create something that inspires men to focus on their mental health and wellness.
Awesome.
You know, if that's an influence, then let me be the one to do that with my voice.
Very cool. This question's a little out of the box, but you know, growing up with that kind of law enforcement stuff in mind, and serving in the military and law enforcement, and then doing Mayans and learning more about club life and being around clubs, do you look at clubs in a different light than you did before Mayans?
No, I think I've always saw it as like a good community of dudes, right? You know, the show makes him out to be a very dramatized version of an MC. Now,
right.
Obviously, MC life, there is things that happen in it, but it's a community, it's brotherhood, right? And that's what I've always been drawn to anyway. So when I saw it, I was like, it's funny because it's no different than law enforcement teams, special operations units. It's no different. It's all the same, right? Different mission, if you will, or different intent, but still the same kind of grouping, me choosing law enforcement in my life is just the fact that I chose to be on this side of the line and chase the bad guy. And some MCs might have chose the bad side of that line, and it is what it is. Working in the prison, I thought was the most fascinating, where I'd get into a scuffle with an inmate. He'd be like, "Hey, Vargas, was that you?" I was like, "Yeah, that's me." He's like, "Okay, cool." And he goes, "Respect." And when an inmate would tell me respect because I did my job and he did his job, whether it was to just with me, right. It's this really weird mutual alignment where you're like, good versus evil. It's always this real gray line. I could have good conversation with the dude, and the next day trying, he's hiding contraband. It is what it is, dog. And so I just understand it, and I feel like the best law enforcement officers out there are the ones that are closest to the street that understand it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was just curious because, we've had other people on and some law enforcement-minded people, and especially coming from mine, people think a certain thing about motorcycle clubs, and then people know what it really is, right? And so I think having that distinction is important for sure.
Absolutely.
How I even heard that you were interested in this is that you reached out to Mooch. So now can you kind of explain, did you watch one of our podcasts? Is that what drew you to this? Were you following Mooch, or, you read his book? How are you here today on our show, talking about your life? I mean, it's kind of I think all of our viewers are going to want to know that.
I think I might have reached out to him.
No. In all honesty, so because of Mayans, I followed a lot of MC. And just by chance of it, a lot of Mongols, right? A lot of Mongols connected with me. I connect with them. And when I fly out to Miami, I go shake all their hands just because it's a community of dudes that know me. Now I know them. And it's been like that in every kind of little city for me. Not saying I align with Mongols or anything. It's just that's the group that reached out to me the most. And so I follow a lot of those guys, even Vargas and whatnot. Yeah. But in that, as an actor who played an MC, I felt it was only smart to be involved in that life as much as possible without stepping in too far. You know what I mean? And once I left the Mayans, it was no different. I still love the culture of it. I still talk to Espinosa Leather about cuts. I'm still involved in the space because I do love it.
Shout out to Eric Espinosa's for sure.
There you go. Shout out to Espinosa's, right? But the funny thing is, Mooch, is you started popping up on my feed because jiu-jitsu, because the world that you live is very similar to my world, to a T almost. Besides the Mongol background, everything is very similar. And so I don't know how, but we just crossed paths, bro. And all of a sudden, you followed me, I followed you. Your book was coming out, and I was like, I'm in. And then I started seeing things about the podcast, bro, I know I'm not an MC dude, but I'm so down to be on the podcast because I feel there's value in my conversation just as much. And so, yeah, even though I'm not a Mayan anymore, the show's done. I still love the culture of the MC. I still want to go. I'm going to get a bike here soon again. And that part of my life will always live. You know what I mean? That part will always be a thing for me, and I'm never going to be able to let that go.
I couldn't be more happy that you reached out to us, or that this all transpired, because you did start a group. You are putting it out there. You are taking care of men that are in a bad headspace. You're helping them through weekly struggles. This is the type of stuff that we're hoping happens with this podcast, is more people start turning around and saying, hey, I might have had some hard times, but I made it through it. And how can I help some guys that are, that are still dealing with stuff? Because there's always going to be that next group of youngsters that are going to be dealing with this stuff, so it's never going to end. It's mental health is here to stay, and it's going to be a continual problem. So absolutely, the more guys that are willing to put the time in to help a brother, or to talk to somebody, or to be available on your phone, I mean, my hat's off to you, bro. I mean, it's huge to spend your extra time when you have a family, when you have a job, when you have a career you're pursuing, which we know writing for Hollywood is not you just do it for 30 minutes a day. So it's all this stuff that you're shoving into a 24-hour day, and you're still taking time to turn around and help guys that either you worked with, or guys that or guys that are coming because they heard about your group. I mean, that's commendable, man. It's huge. Huge.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And I hope the takeaway is, obviously the best would be people reach out, start helping others or seeking help, but even just opening that dialogue, right? People from any walk of life or any lifestyle saying, hey, it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to tell my friend I've been depressed, or, hey, I've witnessed this, or, whatever. But I think opening the door to the dialogue, that's my goal, is that we get more people to just kind of start talking about these things and start talking about mental health. And then cool, if it goes from there to creating groups and getting other things, that's even better. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
that's kind of been our goal. So Rocco, tell us a little about what you got going on. You got your iron and a lot of fire. So what's going on right now? You got some books out. If you want to promote those, your podcast, those types of things.
Yeah, I have a podcast called the Vinny Rock Podcast. That one's really, I just invite people to talk about mental health. I'd love to have you guys on there at any point just to talk about, that's what we talk about. It's just your own personal, your own personal relationship with it and how that looks. I wrote a book called Borderline. That's about my experience as a Border Patrol agent. If you guys are curious about the career field, go check it out. You can get it at Barnes & Noble anywhere. I'm one of the biggest podcasts on the topic of borders and cartels and drugs. You guys can find that. That one's called Borderland. And besides that, listen, I'm just a dude like any other dude. If you need someone to talk to, you have questions, you just want to vent, you just need a father figure to help you, I don't care what it is. Hit me up on my Instagram. I'll respond, guaranteed, no doubt.
Love it, man. I love it.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Hey, Rocco, we just really want to thank you for your time today. I appreciate you opening up and sharing with us. A lot of great stuff and a lot of great stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, just thanks so much for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. Happy to finally be able to sit down with you, kind of hear some of your stories. So it's been great. And if you don't mind, just shooting out your social information one more time so people can follow you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, thank you guys for inviting me. I hope you guys can join my podcast someday. But my social Instagram is Vincent.Rocco. That's ROCCO.Vargas. You can pretty much use that for all my social media. And then at Twitter is going to be @TheReal_Rocco.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, man. We'll definitely have you back on soon or jump on your show, but we'll be doing some stuff together for sure.
Absolutely.
This portion of the podcast is brought to you by First Bank.
Thanks, First Bank.
Thank you, Rocco, and thanks, Mooch. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons below. Find us on Instagram at automoto.ent, at OG_Mooch, at Jason_Logan81. And for more info and episodes, go to automotoentertainment.com. Thank you for tuning in. See you on the next episode of Patched. Patch merchandise is available at automotoentertainment.com. The Patch podcast series is brought to you by Oak and Iron, Craft Cocktail Bar in Thousand Oaks, California, by Outdoor Creations, serving the Southern California and Nashville areas.